Hi, church. I'm excited to be with you as we dive into scriptures together. This week, we're going to be looking at Deuteronomy chapter 5, verses 12 to 15. We are going to particularly look at the topic of Sabbath. For some of you, this word might be very familiar. Perhaps you are already doing a particular practice of Sabbath. For some, maybe you think that Sabbath is just church gathering. There is a richness and robustness to the word and practice of Sabbath, which we are going to be diving into a little bit more together today. Daniel Block, in his commentary, explains that the word Sabbath, or Sabbath, as we know it, literally means to cease and to stop. There's something really significant to that intentionality to stop from our everyday rhythms, the things that we are doing, the work that we are associated, perhaps even the identity of the things that shape our day-to-day moments, and learning to be in the presence of God. Now, as we look at Deuteronomy, this description of Sabbath is also seen in Exodus as well. But the two has very unique and different purposes. In Exodus, as Moses and the Israelites have finally left Egypt, they're on the other side, and the Ten Commandments has just been given to the people, and they're learning how to live this new life together. The Ten Commandments are not just rules, but a way of life. But in Deuteronomy, Moses is about to die. This is his end. This is him passing on the wisdom that he has learned, and he's reminding the people about the Ten Commandments. It has a posture of more like a pastor, shepherding, tending, helping this group of this Israelite community grow in their ways with God. So it begins with this very word, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy as the Lord your God has commanded you. Observe does not mean looking from afar, this observation idea, but observe means they are actually practicing it, doing it. There's an intentionality behind that. And then it says, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. This pays homage to Genesis, where God himself modeled the way of rest. 6 days God created, but on the seventh, he enjoyed his creation. He was resting. And it continues on. It says, on it you shall do no work. Neither you nor your sons or your daughters, your male or female servants, your ox or donkeys, or any of your animals, the foreigners residing in you, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. There is a social element to this sabbatical practice, that it isn't just an individual effort, but it sounds like, as Moses is trying to impart it, it affects the whole community. Verse 15, remember that you were slaves in Egypt, that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath, a reminder of the significance of this rest that is so radical. And with that, I want to encourage you, and as Moses shepherd and pastor the people of Israel, I want to also encourage you from that very same vantage point in how the Sabbath is also significant for you. That you would also, as a community, begin to reflect on how you embody, how you live out some of the questions of what does the Sabbath look like? Firstly, Sabbath is about restoring. In verse 15, Moses is saying, remember that you were slaves in Egypt and that the Lord your God brought you out of there. Remember God's salvation plan in your life. There's a sense of when they gathered together to rest, it's an active remembrance, bringing back to their story, their narrative. J. Dana Trent, in her book, For Sabbath's Sake, she says, from the early first century to today, Eucharist remains the church's only institutionalized Sabbath custom of remembering Jesus' ministry, death, and resurrection. She reminds us that in the Sabbath gathering from the very early churches, The practice of Eucharist or communion, the Lord's Supper, it's central to their story. And for us today, I want to encourage us to think about, where is the practice of the Lord's Supper happening as you gather? Maybe you guys gather and have the Lord's Supper weekly. Maybe it is over a meal. But how is that shaping your story together? As you rest, you are remembering how God has been central to your community, the host of your gathering. What does that look like? To recenter ourselves as we rest together. Whether it is a church gathering, which is perhaps for many the Sabbath gathering, or as you learn to Sabbath and rest in other spaces, maybe with your family, what does that look like? To center yourself in the ways of Jesus, to restore yourself, the practice of Eucharist and communion. Secondly, Sabbath is subversive. It is challenging. It is countercultural. Moses reminded the people that you're remembering how God has broken them free from slavery. It is this challenge for the dominant cultures, the busyness and the fullness that's happening. For the Israelites, they were stuck in difficult, harsh labor. And it is God's salvation plan to bring them out so that they are now living in freedom. And in the same way, we are stuck in a culture of busyness. How many of us use the word busy to describe ourselves? Perhaps many of us do. And so how do we learn to recognize and disrupt that very practice so that there is freedom? It's challenging to that dominant culture. Mandy Smith, in her article, Resting in the Divine Current, she says, rest allows the things stirring in us to reveal God's stirring in all things. So as we are learning to rest, it disrupts the culture. But as the culture is being disrupted, God is also showing up, guiding us, leading us, moving us into something new. What does that look like as you gather together on Sabbath? How is this gathering of togetherness subversive, challenging to the dominant narratives of productivity, of capitalism, of all these things that are capturing our imaginations? Thirdly, I believe Sabbath is also this practice, this embodiment. Perhaps this is the practical subversive way. Is what does it look like to have a kingdom economy? Moses, as he describes for the people, he says, on it you shall not do any work, not just to the people who are listening, but it's also who they are associated and connected with, this social element, that your sons and daughters, your males and female servants, your ox, your donkeys, even the animals, and even the foreigners who are amongst them, there's to be no work. They are to gather and to share and to live and to eat and to spend time in God's presence, in God's rest together. It's a very inclusive practice of rest. What does that look like among you? How do you learn to rest together and create rest for those around us? Perhaps it is an intentional decision of not shopping on the Sabbath day, learning to resist the need to buy more things. And this is the kind of community that I believe God is challenging us to live. Not only are we learning to rest as we spend the time to worship and be with God, but how do we extend that rest to others? How do we create margins for others? I believe house churches are house churches are helpful in shaping this kind of kingdom economy. Because even drawing from the early churches, it was because they were in community that they were learning the needs and the realities that people are facing, and they're trying to redistribute wealth as a way of practicing this kingdom economy. That they recognize that there are needs, so they sold off what they have so that everybody has sufficiency. And in our house churches, in our churches today, perhaps this is also the potential to practice that, to learn to create those spaces, to be authentic, to learn where the needs are and begin to share that and spread the care. And perhaps that's not even just within the church. Perhaps that extends to our neighborhood. Perhaps we recognize that there are spaces and people around us that are in need. Perhaps they are not resting. And God's invitation for us on Sabbath is to see, how do we be generous and caring and serving others so that rest, this Sabbath rest, can extend out. And lastly, I just want to encourage us to know that the practice of Sabbath, as it is as subversive as it is generative in community, as this new story, it is a witness. When we gather to rest together, it offers a different story to the world. It offers a story that says we do not need to follow in the way of the world, because there is a Jesus way, and we're invited to that, and others are invited to that. I want to close by leaving with you a passage from Psalm 81. It points to how Jesus is inviting people to himself to rest in him. So may this be a blessing and an encouragement to you. I removed the burdens from their shoulders. Their hands were set free from the basket. In your distress, you called and I rescued you. I answered you out of a thundercloud. I tested you at the water of Meribah. Hear me, my people, and I will warn you. If you would only listen to me, Israel, you shall have no foreign gods among you. You shall have not worshipped any god other than me. I, the Lord, your God, who brought you out of Egypt. Open wide your mouth, and I will fill it. Blessings, friends.